Excellency Halla Tómasdóttir, President of Iceland, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by commending Iceland, and in particular, President Tómasdóttir, for your unwavering leadership and commitment to gender equality at home and beyond your borders. At the United Nations, yours is a key voice on gender mainstreaming across the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We hope others across the world will look to Iceland for lessons and ideas in this crucial work, especially now. Friends, we find ourselves in a crucial year for democracy. More than 50 countries, representing half of the global population, are holding elections. But at the same time, across the world, democracy is backsliding. Countless societies are seeing civic space diminishing, while freedoms, often those of women, are being eroded. Meanwhile, polarization is undermining democratic institutions. These challenges are not confined by borders, they are global, and so must be our response. International cooperation and solidarity in defending and promoting democratic governance have never been more crucial. For creating the bedrock of resilient, inclusive, and peaceful societies, for underwriting freedom and advancing sustainable development, and for protecting the dignity and the rights of every person. I see 4 areas where we must take urgent action. First, democracy thrives on inclusive participation. It's long past time we promote a culture of dialogue that gives a real voice to people and communities that have traditionally been excluded. That means expanding the meaningful participation of women and girls and underrepresented groups in decision-making processes at every level, from voters to candidates, from decision makers to policy shapers. Youth cannot be left out of the equation. It is young people and young women in particular who are at the forefront of movements advocating for change. Bringing in the perspectives can correct blind spots and ultimately improve decision-making. Supporting civil society and grassroots organizations, especially those led by women, is crucial for safeguarding democratic values and practices. And this is not just an issue of funding. Support comes in many forms, and the most important is about affirming the role of these organizations as pillars of democracy. Encouraging participation also means safeguarding anyone from attack for doing so, including from online violence. And this leads me to the second area where urgent action is needed: protecting freedom of speech. Without it, democracy cannot survive. Attempts to silence journalists are growing more brazen by the day. Media workers face censorship, detention, surveillance, violence, and even killings, often with impunity, and especially against women journalists. The number of journalists and human rights defenders killed doubled between 2021 and 2022, with a 300% increase in enforced disappearances during the same period. The sad reality is that we expect significantly higher figures for 2023 and 2024, when hundreds of journalists, human rights defenders, and activists have been killed in escalating conflicts, including in Gaza. It's time to reignite efforts to safeguard a cornerstone of democratic societies: free, independent, and pluralistic media. Third, we need transparency and accountability when it comes to digital platforms. 2024 is a year unlike any other when it comes to how our digital world is shaping public opinion and electoral outcomes. Left unchecked, digital platforms could have a serious implication for democracy: the proliferation of misinformation, the spread of hate speech, and the use of deepfakes. Technology-facilitated gender-based violence is deliberately wielded to discredit and silence women, and even push them out of public life. Social media platforms that accelerate online abuse must be held accountable. If trends don't change, we will end up with a digital world created by and for men, but inhospitable to women. That said, digital technologies, including artificial intelligence, also offer enormous potential for strengthening our democratic systems. By promoting and enhancing full and active public participation, by boosting education on democratic processes, and by shaping more inclusive civic spaces. Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving into the final stretch of the 2030 Agenda. We may not be where we need to be, but that doesn't mean it's time to give up the fight. Let's stand together in solidarity to provide the leadership, reforms, and investments needed to shape a healthy democratic future where no one is left behind, especially women. The hosts of the Reykjavik Global Forum, WPL, and the Government of Iceland have been vital partners in all our work to achieve a more gender-equal world. Again, I extend my admiration, solidarity, and support to all of you. I look forward to continuing to work together to build a more equal, sustainable, and prosperous future. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to our esteemed panelists. This is a big, big topic. We need to get right to it.
Good morning.
The present century is the century of authority, a century of the right, a fascist century. Those are not my words. Those are the words of an American political commentator, Walter Lippmann, said back in 1933. But it could certainly have been said in many places around the world this past year where elections were held, including last week in the US, where some members from both parties described Donald Trump as a fascist who threatens the very foundations of American democracy. At the same time, Trump won big in what appears to have been free and fair elections, winning millions more votes than his opponent with a populist message that appealed to the working class. So I need to start with you, Chrissy, from the great state of Pennsylvania, a swing state. What, in your view, is the impact of the US election on the global state of democracy?
Well, first of all, thanks for having this important conversation, and I wish we weren't sitting here having it right now. And I wish that I wasn't from the great state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the one who had to bring you all this bad news. But what I would first say is don't count the American people out. Don't ever count the United States out of anything. We are a collective people who understand our responsibility to each other and to the world at large. And so while I am devastated as a woman and as a mom and as a Democrat and as an American citizen, as the daughter of a refugee, all of those kinds of things by the results and what my community said that day, I still have to get up and I have to fight every single day. I have to have hope every single day. And so I have to ask the rest of the world to work with us to push back, but also to listen. Because I think that we are an indicator species for a lot of things, and we talked about this behind the scenes. Not everybody who voted for President Trump, former president, now future President Trump, is a racist, misogynist human. Many of them are just scared. Many of them are also looking for their basic human needs to be met and are worried about things like inflation, jobs, security, and those kinds of things. And so we do collectively still very much need to not sort of just dismiss a very significant part of the American population and the global population at large as well. So I guess your question is kind of what happened and what does that mean for the world? I think that we are a representation of a lot of the anxieties and fears of the world. People are tribal people. We did something that I'm ashamed of, and I wish that didn't happen, but it's now our mission, our purpose to make sure that it doesn't go any farther, that we don't have a 1939 now that we have a 1933. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what our challenge is.
And just very specifically, from within the United States, what needs to be done to protect the integrity of American democracy during the next 4 years?
It's a challenge, and I think that I've been trying to noodle that one through myself. I don't think legislatively, as an example, that there's a whole lot that can be done in the environment that we're in right now. We don't know yet the results of the House of Representatives. We don't know yet whether the House will be held by the Republican Party or swung by the Democratic Party. It almost doesn't matter a whole lot. I don't think that there's a lot of opportunity over the next 2 years to legislate our way out of this kind of thing. But I do think there's an opportunity to make sure that individual citizens are better informed and better educated as to what the implications and consequences are of the election of President Trump. And so we need to be watchful, we need to be collaborative, we need to make sure that we understand and know our neighbors, and that we're making sure to bring them along in the education of what is happening and what the threats are to our individual livelihoods as well as to our collective well-being.
We're going to hear from our guests from outside the United States and your reaction as well. Martin, there was a lot of sexism, racism, homophobia, anti-immigrant rhetoric in the recent U.S. campaign, but also in the discourse in many elections this year that was embraced, perhaps, or at least not rejected by the majority of voters. How and why has the effectiveness of this anti-rights rhetoric changed since the last election cycle?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lara. I think that what we're witnessing today is the outcome of a long, drawn-out process. It did not come overnight. It's no surprise the rise in misogyny, gender inequality, and all of that is the result of decades-long neglect. It is true that in recent years there has been pushback on pushback, but again, we do think that we need to start looking at the root causes. But as we speak here, I would say that this movement is very strong, because when you look at what Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed said about this year being a super election year, when you look at the representation of women in parliaments, this has increased by just 0.1%. And you are talking of elections involving half of the global population. So there must be something wrong. And we all know what those issues are. They have to do with social exclusion. You mentioned misogyny, violence against women. All of this we need to tackle. But the other thing too is we need to look at the institutions of democracy that are in place. Are they responding to the daily challenges that we are facing today? I must say, coming from the parliamentary community, that is not the case. So I think that there is a case to be built for rekindling trust in governing institutions. You need to make parliaments empowered to do what they have to do. You said, Chrissy, that there's not much space for legislative action to correct course in the United States today. But I think in many parts of the world, there is scope for parliaments to come in and say, no, we can put checks and balances on this pushback on rights. Mm-hmm. I also want to mention the fact that there is growing discontent with these institutions of governance, to the extent that people, quote unquote, are taking the law into their own hands. Look at what happened in Bangladesh in August this year. You know, it's popular discontent that pushed the government out, because that government was not being seen to be responding to the needs of the people. So it is important that we make government, we make parliament work and deliver for the people. We want parliament to be a mirror of society and therefore reflect the interests of society. Otherwise, we'll continue to cry over spilled milk. But let me say that we still have hope. There are glimmers of hope out there. There are some success stories that we need to put forward.
Let's hear them.
Yes. Yes. In Rwanda, for instance, there's been pushback, in the rest of the world, on women's representation in parliament. But in elections held in July this year, the quota of women increased to 63% from 61%. It's a good story to say. And this is because of leadership and commitment. If there is leadership and commitment, it happens. In France, this year, the right to abortion was enshrined in the constitution. This is a big success story. In Indonesia, you had the ban on FGM, female genital mutilation, success story. In the Gambia, in Africa, you had the ban on FGM being maintained, of course, largely due to public outcry against those attempts by some people to reinstate female genital mutilation. So what we need to do is to build on these successes and say it can happen, we can correct course with democracy, because democracy is never a finite state. Mm-hmm. It is always a work in progress. And you have to empower, you have to modernize those institutions that articulate democracy, including parliaments and parliamentarians. So
let me just jump on the point that you made about the slow progress that we're seeing in terms of women in the highest levels of politics. There are some notable exceptions, and we just recently saw the new female Mexican president sworn in, and of course we have the great representation here in the presidency in Iceland. But we also just saw the second female U.S. presidential candidate lose in less than a decade. Just 13 of the UN's 193 member states are led by women. 9 of those are their respective countries' first ever female leaders. So Paula, what actions are needed to help accelerate this process, and support more women for high political office?
Good morning, and thanks for the question. I think one of the words that I've heard recently, and I like it, and it certainly is not my invention, but it says shevolution is what needs to happen if we want women and men's talents to be recognized and to allow access to opportunity. And I think you prefaced your question to me by referencing the ascension of the first female Mexican president. It didn't just happen. In 2019, in their constitutional conference, they embedded the notion of parity being everything. And I think that if we want to see us go forward as a global grouping, if we really want to see gender equity become a cornerstone, then we've got to apply the principles of shevolution, equality of opportunity, equality of access to opportunity. Fairness has to be the bedrock. And if women represent over half the population, that should mean they have access, equal access to healthcare, education, everything, not just the crumbs. And I think that when we start making sure that we provide access to economic development and economic opportunity, and then you also couple that with a shift in attitudes. And then I think we should start to see some real finite action in terms of gender empowerment and gender equity. Because right now, and I thought when I heard, I think at the Committee on the Status of Women, and I heard Dr. Hanan Ashwari speak on a conference call. She said that we have to let our conscience as women be our guide. And that means that we've got to look at our institutional structures through a different prism. Where they don't serve our needs as well they should, then we've got to consider as women letting our voices be heard more audibly and also taking action with regard to changing the agenda. Does that happen overnight? Unfortunately, as many of us can attest, it certainly hasn't. And if you listen to what the stats say, it's still another 134 years before you'll see actual parity in some areas. But I think that we have to put that aside and decide that we're going to be activists in terms of moving things forward. And what does that mean? It's as simple as looking at this concept of fairness in looking at how we select. What is a fair candidate process? If we say that women should be represented, if we say that inclusion is important, then clearly we've got to make sure that women not just have a seat at the table, but to get to the table. To be able to be elected, there has to be a fair system for the criteria of candidate selection.
And we know there's many influences that are working against that, unfortunately. that I know, Chrissy, that you've been focused on. One is some new technologies, and another is the foreign influence that has worked to sort of challenge progress in many parts of the world. What are you doing specifically to address these emerging threats?
Sure. In Congress, I am fortunate enough to serve on the Armed Services Committee. I'm a veteran, as well as on the Intelligence Committee. In this Intelligence Committee, I have the purview and opportunity to understand some of the real and present dangers and the threats of the various, bad actors in the world, not just in our own country. And they're real. And I think that's one of the things that is worrisome to me, is that we're not doing a good job of communicating that to the general public. The general public doesn't really understand, doesn't frankly have the time to really understand, why we should be concerned about disinformation, misinformation that is coming from outside the house, so to speak. And I think part of our responsibility is civic engagement, it's civic education. And I think some of the things that we can do is to try to be more forward-leaning with our population to explain what's happening. In the same ways, as an example, that President Biden, I think, was quite effective in showing the world the intelligence that we had of where, what was happening with Russia building up against the border of Ukraine. And showing everyone that information, I think brought everyone on board in the NATO alliance. The same thing, I think, would be useful, honestly, in showing information about bad actors across the world. And that's something that we need to be doing, I think, better. But also, in the meantime, we need to be, I think the United States is not doing a terribly good job of legislating on things like artificial intelligence and those sorts of rising threats, but also opportunities. And I think that this is another place where I'm looking for the rest of the world, so to speak, to come and help us as well. Because when England makes a legislative change, when India makes a legislative change, that moves markets too. And so we need to all collectively, like-minded communities and countries need to collectively get together on these rising threats to make sure that we are changing and moving the way the industry is treating us with that information.
I think, Martin, your group has recently passed a resolution on AI and how to, its impact on democracy and human rights. Can you just talk about what you're hoping to achieve through that resolution?
Yeah, but if you allow me, maybe I should just respond to what Paula said about She Revolution. I want to understand that She Revolution means she for she, but also he, meaning the male partners of this revolution. I say this because when I look at this room, I see that it's predominantly she. We need to make a determined effort to recruit more he's to the conversation, because after we've had wonderful deliberations here, we then have to go out and convince the men, whereas they should be here at the table. So we have to bring men to the table, more men like myself to the table. Now, coming to AI, I think AI, we all agree that it has the potential to be disruptive in a positive way and in a negative way. And what we are trying to do today is to address the challenge of the negative disruptions that AI can cause. And I agree with you, Chris, that it is important that the population be educated on the emergence of this new animal that we're having a difficult time grappling with. At the parliamentary level, we think that it is important that we begin to grapple with the ethical dilemmas that come with the emergence of new technologies. We need to have a conversation between scientists, technologists, and the global decision-making communities. For the time being, I don't see that conversation taking place in a systematic way. And so we have, as you said, adopted a resolution recently, last month, at our General Assembly on the impact of AI on democracy, human rights, and rule of law. And in that resolution, we are making the case for legislatures to be more forthcoming in developing legislative frameworks that regulate and manage in a very responsible way the emergence and development of AI. We also lay emphasis on the need to promote greater transparency and accountability, because that's it. We cannot just let the scientists develop AI with no guidelines, no guardrails, and they need to be accountable to the society as such. So the onus of that implementation of that resolution lies with parliaments, because we believe that parliaments have within their constitutional rights the power to regulate, to put in place frameworks that are reflective of general society, but that can be enforced. You need for such bodies to take the lead. And as an organization, the Interparliamentary Union, the global of organizations, we are mobilizing parliaments to this effect. We are, first of all, saying that parliaments need to be empowered themselves to harness the potential, the positive potential of artificial intelligence, make sure that parliamentary processes are better informed by these new developments, that the evidence provided by AI is harnessed in a way that makes for greater, more efficient policies, but you also then have to provide a framework, and that's what we're trying to do, provide a framework for cross-fertilization of ideas, sharing of good practice, what is working well when it comes to regulating artificial intelligence, which is one of the emerging technologies, and what is not working well. So it's I think, a combination of new policies that I think those policies are very rare and far between. You will agree with me, Chrissy, that we need to focus on, and also empowering institutions of democracy to work with the technology, the scientific community, so that there can be that intelligent conversation that will lead to more responsible development of new technologies.
If I could put a real quick plug in, one of the things that strikes me as a newbie in politics is that there's very few people who have STEM backgrounds in politics, in elected office, and so we need diversity of all kinds. And so if there is a way that we could collectively, either at a nation's level or a larger level, improve and enhance the ability for more of us to be able to run for office who have STEM and STEAM backgrounds, because we're asking our legislators, who are largely not technical people, to legislate quickly on things that are moving very, very fast and are very, very scary or powerful. And I think that's something that's sadly missing. In Congress, our Congress, we have 23% women, which is not 51%, but better than it has been. But we only have, out of 435 of us, we have less than 24 members of Congress who have STEM backgrounds.
That's interesting.
And that's pretty terrifying to me.
I'm going to give Paulo the last word. We're out of time, but just if you could end us on a hopeful note. When we talk about these technologies, I'm a journalist. I mean, sometimes it feels like the misinformation is coming in faster than we can really handle. And I just wonder, give us some hope about how things could progress going forward, knowing all of these challenges that we're seeing to democracy today.
You've asked me the million-dollar question. I think it's good governance. I think good governance and social inclusion will put us on a pathway to moving forward. And if you have good governance, and even in the recent, I think, Nobel Memorial Economic winners, there were 2 economists from MIT and 1 from Chicago. And they said that inclusion and inclusivity fosters economic growth. So where you have societies that are not inclusive, you see that there is a decrease in terms of economic productivity and also the societies being fair. When you start bringing in and screening in those different, disparate, and diverse voices, then you see that you set yourself on a pathway for progress. So while we're not there yet, what's that saying? We're not where we were, and we still have a ways to go. But I think that if we keep those principles in mind, I think we can be on a pathway to some real demonstrable progress and to foster greater and real gender equity.
Thank you so much. Thanks all of you for a great discussion.
It's fast.
Yes.